Got an update for you on a little bit of Democratic Party tension emerging. Progressives pushing back against Biden's push for bipartisanship in that infrastructure package. According to Politico, quote, more than a dozen liberal leaders and groups signed a letter urging the White House and congressional leaders to act quickly on the massive $4 trillion infrastructure proposal, casting it as a once-in-a-lifetime moment that Democrats should seize on right now.
Democratic strategist, CEO of Pine Street Strategies, Don Calloway, culture editor at The Federalist, Emily Jasinski. They join us now to discuss. Don, what do you make of the infrastructure package negotiations and more dragging on, legislative days looking very, very tight here? It doesn't look like anything would even begin over the next several months. Political waters always become dicey the longer that you wait. What do you think?
Yeah, the calendar is very tight. There's not as many legislative days, as you point out, as there are calendar days. So realistically, we're looking at a September timeline for negotiations to get underway in good faith and committees to really start moving, and maybe a November, December passage of the bill. And the context of all of this is that going into next year is a do-nothing legislative year because nobody's going to take a big move either way in advance of the midterm elections. So Democrats are basically telling Joe Biden, let's not waste our time by talking to Republicans who we know are going to play nice while in the Oval Office and are going to go out on the South Lawn and, and torpedo whatever we have going to the media. They're never going to be with us. They don't believe in a broader infrastructure package that addresses human needs. So why are we wasting that time? But fundamentally, that's not who Joe Biden is. He won the presidency fair and square, and as a result, he has a right to govern according to who he is and his style. And we know that his style is to invite the Republicans in, to have these robust, long table discussions, even if he knows that they have no intention of participating in good faith negotiations.
Yeah, well, I think the big sticking point here, Emily, is, look, in terms of like the childcare pieces and all of that, Republicans are not going to be on board with it. But even if we're just talking about the hard infrastructure pieces of this, the pay for is a non-starter. Mitch McConnell has said we are not touching any aspect of the Trump corporate tax cuts. They want to pay for, first of all, I don't think you should pay for it, but I'm sure you disagree on that piece. But anyway, they want to pay for it with user fees. User fees means you're going to hit people with either a gas tax, it's going to be working class people who are driving to work and having to pay tolls and those sorts of things. That's going to be a non-starter for Democrats. So to me, this all seems just like a bunch of theater all the way around.
Oh, yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think this is totally theater, and it's one of those situations where we're heading to the impasse, and the theater plays out in the same way every single time, whether it's budget negotiations. And, sometimes those impasses can be really telling, as I think they are in this case. Infrastructure is something we've seen both sides talking about. There's bipartisan support, blah, 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 but they can't agree even on what the definition of infrastructure is. And that is, again, hugely telling about I think it's telling about the polarization, the level of polarization and the nature of the polarization here. And so sometimes when we head to an impasse, we do see this sort of like representative struggle being encapsulated in it. And I do think that's what's happening here. But I think it also goes to the larger point, which is that I think there's no way that something's passing. You can't even narrow this down into a slim or a narrow bill that I think would pass at this point. I don't think it's possible.
What do you make of that, Don? Even within the Democratic caucus, I saw Josh Geitheimer out. He's going hard on the SALT tax. He's like, we're going to stop bailing out red states like Kentucky, which I thought was, it's an interesting way to discuss these things. But what do you make of, even in the intra-Democratic coalition, there is not a lot of agreement on this thing?
Well, there's not, because Democrats are the party of the big tent. If we had anything other than a two-party system, there's no universe in which AOC and Joe Manchin or even Conor Lamb would be in the same political party. So, that's kind of the nature of the cat wrangling that we have to do. I do think that Democrats, the majority of the majority, if you will, are largely on board for the humanistic aspects of infrastructure, i.e. Some supplements to working families, some child care tax credit. And by the way, these are things that dramatically benefit red states and working mothers, single mothers, and so on and so forth. The real American aspects, real aspects of a real American's lives don't see party. And so the Democrat, this is just, one of any number of issues in which we have the problems of governing that come with having such an extraordinarily broad tent.
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing. These people, a lot of them are very old. So you're betting against, this is New York Times Wednesday, you're betting against the actuarial table every single day that you allow these negotiations
Ask Obama
to go
how
on.
that worked out.
So important to keep in mind as well. Guys, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Next on Rising, Matt Stoller is going to join us to discuss the significance of Biden pushback on pharma, as well as some votes on antitrust. That's when Rising continues.